The silence was the most terrifying part. She didn't even scream when she hit the water. That was the first thing that felt wrong, a violation of the natural order of these things. The second was the sound. It wasn't a splash, it was a churn, a thick, roiling, wet sound that spoke of life beneath the surface. A great, seething, hidden life that had just been disturbed. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. We specialize in stories that grip you from the first second and don't let go, tales of justice, consequence, and the moments that change everything. If you're ready for a journey, hit that subscribe button and join our community. You won't want to miss what happens next. To understand the earthquake, you first have to understand the ground it broke. Cedar Creek High School was a kingdom built on sand, but its citizens believed it was stone. And its undisputed king was Blake Henderson. He wasn't just popular, he was an institution. His presence was a physical force. When he walked the linoleum hallways, they seemed to shine a little brighter for him. His varsity jacket, a deep royal blue with bold, sun, yellow leather sleeves, and the snarling tiger mascot emblazoned on the back, wasn't just a jacket, it was a crown. It was the suit of armor for the golden-haired, square-jawed quarterback who had never, in his 18 years of life, heard the word no from anyone who mattered. His smile was a weapon, disarming and charming, but his eyes, a cool, calculating blue, held the constant, lazy amusement of a cat that knows every mouse in the room. His cruelty wasn't the brutish, obvious kind. It was surgical, delivered with a laugh and a clap on the back, so subtle that the victim often wondered if they were the one being too sensitive. He ruled not through fear, but through the desperate desire of everyone around him to be in his orbit, to feel the warmth of his approval. To be laughed with Blake was a social sacrament. To be laughed at by him was a social death sentence. And on this particular sweltering Friday in late May, the entire senior class was pilgrims seeking his blessing. It was senior skip day. The official school-sanctioned destination was Lake Meridian, a crowded, muddy shore littered with families and younger kids. But the real pilgrimage, the one whispered about in hushed, excited tones in the back of calculus class and passed along via encrypted messages on phones, was to a place none of them had ever seen but everyone had heard of, the Blackwood estate. The rumor was that Blake's father, a real estate developer who occasionally brushed shoulders with true wealth, had secured an invite. It was a myth, a fantasy. The Blackwood Manor was the stuff of local legend, a sprawling, modernist masterpiece of glass and steel nestled in a private, old-growth forest on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a high wall and an aura of impenetrable mystery. The owner, a man named Silas Blackwood, was a ghost. A reclusive billionaire, some said a tech genius, others whispered a retired arms dealer, who valued his privacy above all else. When the students' cars, a long, snaking line of beat-up sedans and proud trucks, pulled up to the unassuming service gate Blake had directed them to, there was a collective intake of breath. They climbed over one by one, dropping onto soft, manicured grass that felt like carpet. And then they saw it. The estate unfolded before them like a dream. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. Low-slung and dramatic, all sharp angles and vast panes of glass that reflected the perfect blue sky. But the true centerpiece, the thing that made them all fall silent, was the pond. It wasn't a pond, it was a jewel. Spring-fed and impossibly clear, it was a perfect, shimmering oval nestled in a cradle of smooth, gray boulders and weeping willow trees whose slender branches trailed in the water. The bottom was not mud, but a mosaic of colorful, round stones, amethyst, jade, and lapis lazuli, that seemed to glow from within. The air hummed with the scent of blooming jasmine and clean, damp earth. It was paradise. A stolen, forbidden paradise. The party ignited quickly, a burst of nervous, exhilarated energy. Bluetooth speakers blared bass, heavy music that echoed strangely off the water. Coolers were cracked open, their contents spilling onto the pristine grass. They were invaders in a sacred space, and the thrill of the trespass was a drug more potent than any cheap beer. It was into this world of borrowed, fragile luxury that Luna had been reluctantly, nervously pulled by a well-meaning but naive girl named Chloe from her homeroom. "You have to come," Chloe had insisted, her eyes wide. "Everyone will be there. It'll be a great way to meet people." Luna had hesitated. She'd seen the way Blake looked at her in the hallways, a predator's idle curiosity. But the loneliness of a new school in a new town, the silence of her own cavernous house, had pushed her. Maybe, just maybe, she could be normal for a day. She stood apart from the revelry, a slight, solitary figure in a simple vintage-style sundress, her dark hair a curtain she sometimes hid behind. Her eyes, an unusual shade of hazel that seemed to shift from green to gold in the light, didn't scan the crowd for a place to fit in. Instead, they observed, they cataloged. They took in the careless way. A boy tossed his kin into the shrubbery, the loud, performative laughter, the fragile pecking order playing out in real time. She saw the way they all orbited Blake, a system of planets around a dying star. She felt a familiar, wary sadness settle over her. It was the same everywhere, just with different scenery. The first incident happened by the makeshift snack table. Blake, holding court, had accidentally bumped into her as she reached for a bottle of water. The contact was deliberate, a testing of boundaries. The cup of cherry, red soda in his hand didn't just spill, it seemed to leap, arsing through the air and splashing across the front of her white dress, a vivid, sticky scarlet stain spreading over her heart. The laughter that erupted was sharp, nervous, a packed sound. Luna had frozen not in humiliation, but in a cold, controlled anger. She slowly wiped the dripping liquid from her cheek with the back of her hand, her eyes locking with his. There was no apology in his gaze, only a glint of triumph. "You should watch where you're standing," he'd said, his voice a smooth, mocking drawl. One of his friends, a lanky kid named Mike, had chuckled uncomfortably. Come on, Blake, it was an accident." But Blake's eyes never left Luna's. "Was it?" he murmured, just for her. She had turned without a word and walked away, towards the water, seeking solace in its familiar, dangerous beauty. That was her mistake, turning her back on him. A king cannot be ignored. A few minutes later, as she tried to find a quiet spot to clean her dress, he was there again, his shadow falling over her. "Problem, new girl. You don't seem to be having much fun." He gave her a condescending pat on the head, a gesture you'd use for a dog, which quickly turned into a rough grab of her hair, yanking her head back. The pain was sharp, igniting. "Let go of me," she seethed, her voice low and venomous. He laughed, a short, ugly sound, and shoved her backwards. She stumbled, her ankle twisting on an uneven stone, and fell hard onto the grass. The impact stung, and a faint, red mark bloomed on her cheekbone. The crowd, sensing blood in the water, drew closer. This was the main event. Mike tried to pull Blake back. "Dude, that's enough. We're guests here." Blake shook him off, his eyes blazing with the intoxicating power of the moment. "Guests, Mike, look around. This is our day, and she's the one who doesn't belong." Humiliated, aching, and with a cold fury building inside her that was as deep and dark as the pond itself, Luna picked herself up and walked away, not towards the party, but towards the one place on this entire estate that felt like hers. The flat, sun-warmed rock at the water's edge where she had sat with her father 1,000 times. She pulled a small, waxed paper packet from the pocket of her dress. Inside were hard, reddish pellets that smelled of copper and salt. She began to crumble them between her fingers, letting the pieces fall into the water. The surface, which had been as still as glass, began to stir. Shapes emerged from the deep, shadowy center of the pond. Dozens of them. They were small, but they moved with a purpose that was unnerving. Their bodies were a dull, armored silver, but their bellies flashed a vicious, bloody orange-red. Pygocentris naturari, her father's pride and joy. His aquatic security system. He called them, joking but only half. He was a man who believed in layers of defense, and the piranhas were a very persuasive, very final layer. She was lost in the ritual, in the familiar, hypnotic swirl of the feeding fish, when his voice shattered the peace. Fish food. The nickname was meant to demean, to reduce her to what he thought she was, prey. She didn't turn. She could feel his presence looming behind her, a blot on the perfect day. "This is a private party. You got an invite." She finally looked at him, and the storm in her eyes had subsided into an eerie, absolute calm, the calm of the deep water before a tsunami. "You shouldn't be here, Blake," she said, her voice low but carrying across the now quieting crowd. "None of you should." The challenge was so audacious, so utterly unexpected, that it stole the breath from the onlookers. To challenge Blake was one thing. To challenge his dominion over this stolen kingdom was another. Blake's smirk was a brittle mask. His authority was being questioned, and in front of his entire court. This could not stand. "I go where I want," he declared, puffing his chest. "This is my school, my town, and for today, this is my pond." He took a step onto the rock. The air grew thick. I think you need to cool off. You seem a little tense. The threat was now explicit. Mike's voice was a desperate whisper. Blake, man, don't. This is getting out of hand. But Blake was a missile that had already been launched. He reached command. Don't. Was sharp. Final. It was the command she used with the dogs with the staff. It was not a word she was used to having ignored. He ignored it. His hands, strong from years of throwing a football, shoved her hard in the center of her back. There was no grace in the fall. It was a violent, flailing expulsion from the safety of the land. She hit the water, and the world changed. The churning sound was immediate, a boiling, thrashing cacophony that was utterly alien. The crystal water clouded in an instant with a frenzy of silver flashes and the dissipating red of the feed. The students at the edge gasped, stumbling back. They saw the fish really saw them now, swarming around her submerged form, their bodies a living, hungry vortex. Then she surfaced, and she was calm. She gasped for air, but her movements were controlled, a practiced tread water. The piranhas swarmed around her, brushing against her legs and arms with an intimacy that was horrifying, but their razor-sharp jaws remained closed. They wove around her like a living silver cloak. It was a scene from a nightmare or a miracle. The silence from the crowd was absolute, broken only by the churning water and the distant, forgotten music. Blake's triumphant grin was a grotesque fossil on his face. His brain couldn't process the data. She was supposed to be screaming. She was supposed to be bleeding. She was supposed to be sorry. Luna swam to the edge with a slow, powerful crawl and pulled herself onto the grass. Water streamed from her, but she stood unbent. She turned, and her gaze, those strange, shifting eyes, found Blake. And in them, he saw not a victim, but a judge, and an executioner. Their pygocentris naturari, she began, her voice clinical as if she were a museum docent. Red-bellied piranhas. My father is Silas Blackwood. He's a collector of rare things. These are his. Illegally imported. He calls them his guard dogs. She took a step forward. Blake took a step back. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted. They're shy, really. But they're conditioned. They know the sound of the feed hitting the water. They know my scent. I'm the one who feeds them. I'm part of their environment. She stopped, now directly in front of him. He could smell the pond water on her, a clean, mineral scent mixed with something else, something metallic and wild. But a new scent. She whispered, the sound carrying in the dead air. A violent splash. The pheromones of panic. That's the sound of an animal in distress. That's the dinner bell. Blake's bravado crumbled into dust. The color drained from his face. You're insane, he stammered, his voice a thin reed. Luna's smile was a cold, bloodless thing. Am I? You wanted me to be fish food, Blake. You said it yourself. You wanted to see me cool off. She glanced at the water, which was still agitated, the fish patrolling just beneath the surface like tiny, patient sharks. So why don't you experience your own joke? See how funny it is from the inside. The challenge was a guillotine blade hovering. Blake let out a nervous, ragged laugh. You're crazy. I'm not getting in there. This is a joke. Mike, tell her this is a joke. But Mike was silent, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the water. Luna didn't answer him. She simply raised her hand, a small, subtle signal. From the shadow of the willow trees, two men emerged. They were large, dressed in the dark, tactical uniforms of private security. They moved with a quiet, fluid efficiency that spoke of military training. They had been watching the entire time. They flanked Blake, their presence sucking the last of the warmth from the air. What is this? Blake cried out, his voice rising in pitch, cracking with a fear he had never known. Let go of me! My dad will sue you! He'll own this place! He'll have you arrested! He was thrashing now, but the guard's grips were like iron. Luna walked closer, her demeanor still eerily placid, for trespassing, for assault, for the destruction of private property. I have 50 witnesses, Blake. And you have my father's lawyers to look forward to. They make piranhas look friendly. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. But first, you have my lesson. What followed was a brutal, ceremonial unmasking. The two guards dragged the screaming, begging football star to the water's edge. The raw animal terror in his voice was a sound none of them would ever forget. It was the sound of a soul being stripped bare. P.O.E.S. Lona, I'm sorry. I did it, manite. I will do AYCG. PS1 marks Y. He shrieked, his eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on the swirling water. The piranhas, sensing the crescendo of panic, had formed a tight, shimmering ball of anticipation just below the surface, their red bellies collectively pulsing like a single, hungry heart. Luna knelt, bringing her face level with his as the guards forced him to his knees. Her expression was not one of rage, but of a profound, almost sorrowful disappointment. Your apology is worthless, she said softly. It's a reflex like a nerve twitching after it's been cut. But I'm not a murderer. I won't kill you. For a fleeting second, hope flickered in his tear-filled eyes. She continued, but I am a teacher. And you, Blake Henderson, have failed to learn the most basic lesson that every action has a consequence. Today, you graduate. She stood and gave a single, sharp nod. With a final, grunting heave, the guards launched Blake Henderson into the pond. His scream as he hit the water was cut short as it filled his mouth. The pond didn't just react, it detonated. The serene, beautiful jewel became a blender of froth and crimson. It wasn't a single attack, it was 1,000. The piranhas, driven into a frenzy by the perfect storm of his terror, his unfamiliar scent, and the violent disturbance, swarmed over him. They were not eating him, they were dismantling him. They tore at his clothes, his precious varsity jacket shredding into blue and gold rags that floated on the surface. They nipped at his arms, his legs, his back, 1,000 tiny, searing pains like being stabbed simultaneously with hot needles. The water around him turned pink, then red. He flailed, a grotesque, writhing puppet, choking, screaming bubbles, a spectacle of utter annihilation. It lasted for 30 seconds. To everyone watching, it felt like an hour in hell. Then, Luna whistled, a high, piercing sound that cut through the chaos. As if controlled by a single mind, the piranhas broke formation and vanished back into the depths, leaving behind a cloud of blood and the tattered remains of a boy's ego. The guards waded in and dragged the sobbing, broken form from the water. He was a horrifying sight. His body was a canvas of hundreds of bleeding punctures and cuts, superficial in terms of mortal danger, but deep in terms of psychological scarring. He was trembling violently, curled into himself, weeping great, shuddering sobs, muttering no more, please, no more, over and over again. He was a king who had lost his crown, his kingdom, and his very self in the span of 3 minutes. Luna looked down at him, her face unreadable. Then she turned to the frozen, terrified crowd. Her voice, when it came, was flat and carried absolute authority. The party is over, she announced. Get out. Now, if any of you ever speak of this, if any of you ever so much as whisper my name, you will answer to me. And my pets are always, always hungry. They didn't need to be told twice. It was a stampede. A frantic, chaotic scramble over the wall into cars, leaving behind a wasteland of empty cups and shattered illusions. The aftermath was a study in quiet power. Blake's family, wealthy and connected, roared into action. They threatened lawsuits, they went to the police. But the Blackwood legal machine was a silent, crushing glacier. Expert witnesses testified that the fish, while aggressive, were not a known danger without provocation. The edited security footage showed only Blake's initial assault. The 50 witnesses, when interviewed by stern police officers and sharp lawyers, suddenly remembered very little. It was all a blur. I didn't see anything. He fell, I think. The official story became a tragic accident. A trespassing teen had provoked a school of unusually aggressive fish. Blake was hospitalized. The physical wounds healed, leaving a map of fine white scars across his skin. The psychological wounds did not. He returned to school a ghost. He jumped at slamming lockers. He couldn't look anyone in the eye. The varsity jacket was gone, replaced by long-sleeved shirts even in the heat. The laughter that had once followed him was now averted gazes and pitying whispers. He was a living cautionary tale. Luna finished the school year. She wasn't popular. She wasn't hated, she was revered and feared. She had achieved the one thing she had wanted from the beginning, to be left alone. She walked the halls with a new, unassailable quiet, a girl who carried the weight of a deep, dark secret and the power that came with it. She had tried to escape the strange, intense world she came from, only to discover that she was its most potent weapon. She had not just survived the bully, she had dismantled him, using his own cruelty as the tool. She had found, in the end, a painful and lonely peace, but it was a peace she had forged herself in the churning, red waters of her own backyard. So, What is the true cost of a moment of cruelty? And when justice is served not by the system, but by the very environment the bully sought to dominate, can it ever truly be called justice? Or does it simply create a new kind of monster? Luna didn't win friends or become prom queen. She became something else, something more lasting and far more terrifying, a legend. A reminder that in the deepest, stillest waters, the most dangerous predators often lie in wait. I've been wondering, from which part of the country are you watching this video? The reactions to a story like this can be so different depending on where you're from. Let me know in the comments below.